Process mapping is something that you have now been exposed to somewhat. I understand it's still a little bit difficult to understand as a large concept, but hopefully getting some practice drawing out your own process map was one way to get you started. To review, process maps are visual displays of how work gets done in an organization. It typically focuses on a specific process and takes it from start to finish. So, the moment the project begins or the process starts, all the way through the outcome of that process or the completion of that task. Process maps are used to highlight inefficiencies, gaps, or flaws in the process for improvement. A lot of times, what we see when we start to map these out, and some of you saw in your async application, is that by drawing out these processes in swim lanes, we can start to see where confusion might happen, or where it's not very clear who or what swim lane is responsible for completing parts of the task. Or maybe there's some overlap. These are areas where we can really dive in and clarify what's supposed to be happening, who's supposed to be doing it, and why it contributes to the process or the values that we care about as an organization. It can also be used to analyze cross-functional handoffs. These are places in the process where you drew something crossing a swim lane. So you said that a process where work was being done here is transferred to a different swim lane or transferred from one person to another. This is another big process gap or area where we can intervene as OBM specialists. Another use for a process map is pinpointing areas for focus in a performance management or a different type of OBM project. So for instance, perhaps we see that we have lots of cross-functional handoffs happening in a process. We might want to pinpoint those handoffs as an area for improvement or an area for streamlining and efficiency and fluency, which would be a performance management project. We can also use process maps to define fixes outside of individual employees in the process. So sometimes with performance management or performance diagnostics, we tend to think a little bit narrowly about who is performing the task, when really some of the issues with the antecedents or consequences in that task process or in that contingency might be related to other swim lanes or other departments. The only problems with process mapping, the only problems, one is it's very difficult, right? This was a stretch for you guys to really start to attempt to define these steps, put them together, think about where all of these overlaps and handoffs happen. It also doesn't recommend necessarily how to impact the issues that you start to see. So unlike our PDC or our ETIP or consequence analysis that tend to give us some suggestions on what to do next, process mapping is something that kind of just highlights some potential areas for next steps. It's also, as we said, a complex procedure. So learning how to do and how to implement a process map procedure can be challenging. It also tends to change depending on what type of organization you work in. Doing a process map with a partnership of two independent BCBAs is probably much different than doing a large scale process analysis of how insurance claims are processed at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So it might be a learning process that we have to do many, many times in order to really have that external validity or be able to generalize this skill from one specific project to another. The examples here might give you a little bit more insight, but again, I suggest this is an area where if you really want to become competent, go out and do some research, get some ideas about how this happens in real life. Talk to other OBM specialists that do this on a regular basis and get some more insight into how this might help you, how you might use this in your future practice.